This actually leads very well into the next part, which is actually a panel on education and workforce. So I invite the panelists to come. I'm introducing the moderator of the panel, which is Dr. Linda Sapochak. Dr. Linda Sapochak is the Division Director for the Division of Materials Research at NSF. She manages one of the most diverse divisions spanning condensed matter physics, materials theory and computation, solid-state chemistry, electronic and photonic materials, as well as polymers, ceramics, and metals. With an annual budget of over 300 million, her division supports individual investigator, small team, and center grants, as well as mid-scale research instrumentation and national user facilities. She co-chairs the NSTC subcommittee for the Materials Genome Initiative and has developed interdisciplinary programs in material sustainability, data science, quantum information science, and synthetic biology for materials. Prior to her career in government, she was an assistant professor of chemistry at UNLV and a senior scientist at PNNL, working to develop electronic materials for solid-state lighting applications. She has over 50 scientific publications and 16 patents. She was selected as the MRS Fellow in 2020. So Linda will be moderating the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. My name is Linda Sapochak, and I'm very happy to be here to moderate this panel. I want to first start out by thanking the Chicago Quantum Exchange, and especially Professor David Oshalom for inviting me here to moderate this panel. David and I go back with respect to funding of QuizNet and the Triplets program. And so I've been involved in the Quantum Leap Big Idea with NSF. And so I've seen a lot of exciting things happen in both education and in workforce development. And I'm very excited to be here with this very distinguished panel. So what I'd like to start out to do is to ask each of my distinguished panelists to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about your career path and how you became involved in quantum information science, education, and workforce. And then we'll go and have a really fun discussion. So I'll call you out. Let me start with Zeke. Zeke, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Linda, for the introduction. Zeke Johnston-Halperin. I'm a professor of physics at Ohio State University. My day job, so to speak, is in materials for quantum information. But starting about 1.5 to 2 years ago, I got involved with education initiative built around quantum information science aimed at the undergraduate population. And so I'm leading a team that now comprises over 20 colleges and universities, as well as a number of industrial partners and other partners. And the acronym we came up, I can't take credit for this, but it's catchy. It's QSTEAM, QU STEAM. QSTEAM. We were able to jump on qsteam.org if anybody wants to check out our website. qsteam.com is inexplicably claimed but not occupied, so there's a brain teaser. And so I don't want to take up too much time, just an introduction. So just say, we're working as a consortium to develop a template for what individual classes up to a full minor might look like in the area of QISE.
Thank you, Zeke. So let me go to Ofelia.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Ofelia Aguirre, and I've worked with in science education for the past 21 years at the University of California system. Initially, I was focused on working with community college students on an NIH Bridges to the Baccalaureate program. And following that, we worked on an NSF STEP program, and that was at UC Santa Barbara. And I think that program really impacted me in sort of my career trajectory and my passion for working with community college students and students who are first generation, low income and underrepresented in STEM, and helping them achieve their career goals. And this program also created infrastructure at UC Santa Barbara that really allowed us to build on for future initiatives that have been really successful there. And so it was a great partnership for us, and it helped us establish partnerships with K-12 schools and community colleges that were really important for us. And for the past 10 years, I've served as a director at the Center for Science and Engineering Partnerships at UC Santa Barbara. And We're an education and workforce development hub for the design, implementation, and evaluation of projects that broaden participation in STEM. So we work with faculty and academic partners at community colleges and K-12 to develop broader impact components for their awards. We work with faculty who are developing research centers, and we also do evaluation. So for all these projects, we really focus on evaluation. In the past 10 years since we've been a center, we've engaged 65,000 participants at all levels. So we're really excited to be working with so many people and have developed so many partnerships. In 2019, I was invited to be part of the Quantum Foundry at UC Santa Barbara. And the NSF Quantum Foundry, has really been an opportunity for me to work in a different context, in a different area, with Foundry leadership to help them establish partnerships with K-12 schools, community college faculty, and nonprofit organizations to really effectively recruit and engage students that are not in the pipeline right now, and also develop accessible pathways for them so that it's obvious to them how they can engage in QIS.
Thanks, Ofelia. I'm sure we'll hear more about that when we go through some of the other discussions. Let's go to Karen. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Most of my information is in the brochure, and if you read that, you'll see that most of my history is working with K-12, specifically high school physics, and so you're probably thinking, why is she here? So I'll just forego all the other and tell you why I'm here. I taught high school physics for many, many years. I was an administrator. I've done middle school. I've done pretty much all of that. But what really set me off was about 10 years ago, I went to a teacher workshop up in Canada at the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics. And I was literally blown away. I knew nothing about what they were talking. And I realized that there was so much out there that I didn't know. And my next question was, why have I never heard of this? Why is it not happening in the United States? Part of that learning curve, and it's a pretty steep learning curve, by the way, from a normal classroom teacher, was to go to the Institute for Quantum Computing up in Waterloo. And again, I was fascinated is not even the word. You know, I just don't even know how to describe how I knew maybe this much about what they were talking. And so when I got done with that, I started asking around in the physics community as to why are we not doing this? Don't the United States teachers need to know this? Because obviously it was in the curriculum up in Canada, you know, just north of us. And so it became readily apparent to me that no one here really seemed to care very much. They were like, oh, it's okay, we're not ready for that, and so forth. And I was like, no, I think they're pretty much way ahead of us. So I just, I guess it's my old age, my tenacity, my southern drawl, I don't know what, but I just kept fighting and kept saying this needs to be in our schools, this needs to be in our schools. I would do workshops, I would rally together with teachers and try to, you know, figure out ways it could be in the curriculum. So all that to say, a couple of years ago, I got a call saying, so you think you've got this figured out? And I'm like, no, I don't have it figured out, but I think we need to do something. So here I am, slightly intimidated by all the smart people here, so don't ask me any quantum questions, but I'll talk about K-12 all day long.
I think, Karen, you convinced everybody why it's important that you're here, so thank you for that. We're excited to hear from everybody. Thomas, please introduce yourself.
I'm Thomas. I'm an associate professor at University of Illinois, Chicago. Very, very happy to be a new member of the Chicago community. In my previous life, I was the IBM HBCU Quantum Center Director. For that, we came to IBM with an issue of diversifying the quantum workforce, and that's now grown in 1 year to 23 different institutions out of 100 or so total HBCUs that are now active in QIS. I do have a UIC role, so I'm in the ECE department. We just have one of 19 ABET accredited engineering physics programs.
Wow, congratulations.
And I'm hopeful that we can not necessarily turn engineering physics into quantum engineering, but help to drive the path specifically in the Midwest for that particular mission. And then all the other great stuff in my bio misses a lot of the other Zoom meetings that I'm in with respect to the APS Committee of Minorities and the AIP Team Up workshop for implementation. So I was on sabbatical, so I was able to not teach and do a lot of these other things. But next semester, I'll just be back to normal Thomas physicist.
Slammed, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Well, last but not least, we have Diana. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Diana Franklin, and I'm an associate professor at University of Chicago. And right now my research area is computer science education and quantum computing education. And I got my PhD in computer architecture, specializing in new technologies. And one of those new technologies I did on and off was quantum computer architecture. And my plan had always been to go into computer science education once I received tenure at, I went to a teaching-oriented institution because I really cared about teaching and education. And then after I got tenure and moved into computer science education research, I discovered that I just really, really loved it. It was what would keep me up at night. I would think about it when I was walking, and I just truly loved it. And so as I got more into it, I decided that I needed a position that was more research-oriented and less the practice of teaching so that I could do more research. So I moved here in 2015, and so now I just recently, last year, got tenure here in computer science education. Quantum computing education is the first time that I've been able to combine any of my computer architecture research skills with my computer science education research skills. And so now I no longer do architecture research, and I've dedicated that part of my time to quantum computing education research with our NSF Expeditions project. It's large enough to dedicate a lot of time and resources to quantum education.
Wow. Thank you, Diana. And I want to thank all the panelists for agreeing to be here today. I think the audience can see we have a diversity of expertise and experience here, and we really need that to talk about the challenge that we have ahead of us. So if you allow me to provide some context before we delve into some questions for you that we're going to have a discussion about, coming from the government, I would like to quote from the National Quantum Coordination Office, which is located at the White House at the Office of Science and Technology Policy, that quantum information science described by them and to the general community is emerging from a deeper consideration of how quantum physics, which is our description of the world at the microscopic level, has implications for information science, how real systems like computers process information. Okay, so building on key quantum information scientific discoveries since the 1980s, many Nobel Prizes, pioneering experiments through the 1990s, and then engineering coming on board to try to harness quantum phenomena, and now commercial activity, we are at the cusp of a second quantum revolution. And I think as you hear, and I think Diana hit the nail on the head, you know, we're having to bring together people that think about quantum phenomena from the physics point of view, but also have to build it into something that's useful. And we all don't talk the same language. And so it's really imperative that we need to build a new workforce. So because of the National Quantum Initiative Act that was instigated in 2018, a Quantum Economic Development Consortium was made of stakeholders aiming to enable the growth of the U.S. quantum industry. And they actually did a survey of the industry partners. And what they found was that regarding QISE industrial needs, 55% of the respondents stated that they have to provide additional training to new hires, and 65% find hiring quantum information science employees, which I'm not sure what that is, and maybe we can define that today, maybe not, is really challenging. So some of the questions that they raised are, you know, and that we should talk about is what kind of jobs are really needed in order to build this quantum information science workforce, and what's the education level that's needed for these jobs, what skills are needed for these jobs, and, you know, how do we access the missing millions and all of the skills across this country so we can increase inclusion and really take advantage of all the great ideas out there. So based on that, my first question I'm going to ask Zeke to start us off is, with these questions in mind in that context, if the U.S. really wants to lead the next quantum revolution, what do you think the major challenges are for developing the QISE, including engineering workforce? And really, does everybody have to be a quantum physics expert in order to be part of this enterprise? So Zeke, if you could start us off, and then we'll ask our other panelists to comment.
Sure. Well, I will stand on the shoulders of giants, as they say, in reporting from my team, the QSTEAM team, which includes both subject matter experts and STEM ed experts. And so we're supported through the NSF Convergence Accelerator program, which required us, to their credit and to our benefit, to do some surveys along the lines of what QEDC has done as well, and sort of indexing off that. And I think what we've taken away in sort of an operational mode are two key challenges. And the first is, and I'll throw my discipline under the bus here, is physics has sort of systematically failed to figure out how to teach quantum mechanics. And by that, I mean that the way we typically teach it is at the junior or senior level, and it's the whole enchilada, and it's basically...
You're talking undergraduate, right? Junior, senior level?
Sorry, speaking at the undergraduate level. And that's not what I would call operational. So if we look at what we really need to have a quantum economy, everybody doesn't need to be a PhD physicist. And I think that's not necessarily where everybody, in my community is thinking. But so just to put some comparisons, for semiconductor physics, the semiconductor economy, not everybody needs grad level solid state to be a semiconductor engineer or a technician. A favorite one of mine for teaching intro physics is that GPS satellites need to take general relativity into account in order to be accurate. That doesn't mean everyone building a satellite needs to know general relativity. So I think there's a real pedagogical challenge in figuring out, how do we break down quantum and focus on, say, just the quantum information pieces, figure out how to deliver those early in the curriculum, freshman, sophomore year, in a way that's useful for training engineers. And I think that the second challenge is one shared broadly across STEM, but we maybe have some leverage in the area of quantum information to attack just because it's new. So we don't have as much inertia to overcome. But traditional STEM education, I would say, is neither effective nor equitable. And I think this is a bit of an opinion on my part. So we will see as we look into this, but I think those are linked traits. And so I think
your panel would agree with you on that being important. So
yes. So on the effectiveness axis, I think, and this is so common as to be sort of trite, but there's the concept that, okay, you get your 4-year degree and then you get your first job to really learn what you need to know to do anything, right? And so I see that as a consumer of undergrad education when I am training PhD students, that our current approach turns out students who are very good at the formalism, but not great at real-world problem solving or a deeper conceptual understanding and linking concepts from different areas to solve problems.
So let me stop you for a minute, because I think that's one of our other questions is that, do you think it's more important, and maybe I can call on Thomas to respond to your comment there, Zeke, about, do we really need to have a full breadth and understanding of all of QIS in order to be successful in this field? Or, or do you have to have a deep understanding in one domain? Or do we need a mixture of those kind of people? Would you like to comment on that, Thomas?
Yeah, so I'd rather say I'm closer to the mix in the sense that I think one of the advantages that we've had in the U.S. for a very long time is a specialized PhD access and infrastructure, so that can't get lost in the mix of what we're doing. However, I think that the opportunity of QISE is that we have an opportunity to shape the field in such a way that there are multiple seats at the table. Those that are very specialized, but also a very breadth of knowledge. And something that I've been battling with in my own proposal writing is this concept of what a quantum engineer is. And the concept really makes me think of how much chemistry does a chemical engineer really know? Or what exactly, with respect to mechanics, does a mechanical engineer actually know? And I think once we can arrive on the necessary elements, which is something that Zeke's project is really doing, once we arrive at that, I think it will also impact the teaching that goes on in undergraduate quantum mechanics courses, such that we do a better job for those that go on to get these PhDs in more specialized things. So I think if we take an approach that's bringing everybody to the table, it will help the people that are already in a more traditional system.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing so far is some of our major challenges. One is we're not teaching the ideas of quantum information science early enough and not doing it well. And we also need to expand to other fields. And it really depends on, what type of area they're going to go into and it's really the communication between fields. So maybe we go to, excuse me, Diana, to talk a little bit about, at what education stage do you think quantum information science concepts could be introduced? And Diana didn't mention this, but she is leading some of the national efforts on K through 12 education called Q2 Work. And I'm wondering, it's not just about the undergraduate and graduate level. We're talking about the whole spectrum of education. So Diana, do you want to say a few words about what you've been working on and what you think about the stages of education in quantum and what other people have said so far?
Yeah, I definitely think that you can introduce quantum concepts quite early depending on how you do it. I think that things like the fact that measurement disturbs state, that's something that all scientists should learn, because when they're designing a study and collecting data, they should be perturbing the system as little as possible. And so there are a lot of different concepts that if you can identify them, pull them out, and apply them to different scientific fields or mathematical fields, then we get time in the school day to do them before college, which allows us to reach more people and get a more diverse set of people that might get interested in quantum. So in the program Q2 Work, we sort of have two main goals. One is to create sets of resources for teachers to understand some of these key concepts of QIS, and give them ideas on how they could integrate them into their own physics, mathematics, chemistry, and computer science classes. And Karen Jo Matsler has been a partner with us on the physics side, and so we're leading this effort. And then the other one is that we're trying to make a community of QIS educators, or those committed to QIS education, through the Q12 partnership, which is started by OSTP and NSF. And so we're leading that effort, and it's resulted in things like Intel worked with us to create some videos that highlight different types of careers for quantum. And so I think that goes to sort of Thomas's point of there are lots of different careers in quantum. And if you're going to be a programmer, it doesn't mean that you have to understand all of the details of how the hardware works, right? And so we definitely have different things that we would teach different people. And so when we're looking at younger ages, we want to look at the things that everyone should know and that are really, you can teach intuitively, and are principles that go across all of quantum. And so, yeah, so I think I'll stop there.
Excuse me. So this gives an opportunity. Many of our distinguished panelists are working on a number of programs related to the workforce development. And Karen, would you like to say a few words about the collaboration with Diana before we move to the next question?
Amen. They have been very helpful in putting together maybe what some of those key concepts need to be for students, whether they be in K-12 or even at the undergraduate level, as to what needs to be taught, because you obviously have to have some type of framework first. So that's what I've been working with them the most.
So I think it's interesting because Zeke was talking about undergraduate education in his Convergence Accelerator project in quantum education, correct? And you're talking about trying to teach at the undergraduate level. I'm wondering, Zeke, if you could say a few words about, you're getting students and you're teaching it to them now and not, as in your words, not doing such a great job. What is it that maybe Karen and Diana need to be mindful of about what they are working with K through 12 that those students need to know if they are coming to a class or the type of training and education that needs to be done at the undergraduate level?
I don't think I would presume to answer that specific question. I think K-12 education is a very complicated space, but maybe one thing I can say that, and I think we're obviously very excited about and tracking closely what's happening at Q2Work, and very thankful that because of their good work, we can focus on a smaller slice of the pie, but that interface is obviously very important. And coming back to the earlier comments about when to start teaching quantum, one thing we've really focused on is how do we teach quantum concepts to a first semester freshman? And I think that has a lot of overlap with a senior or a junior in high school. And I think this is the other half of that second point that I said, that it's ineffective and inequitable. And I think the inequity part comes from the focus on formalism and this isn't intentional, it's not a malicious act, but the impact is that puts a strong emphasis on the preparation of the student walking into the classroom. So basically, if you haven't gotten on the STEM train in middle school, then by the time you hit your freshman year in college, it's really hard to pivot and discover your freshman year that you love science or engineering and get involved. So what we're looking at are, acknowledging the fact that it's not 1950, but 2021. So I like to think of this as like a souped up graphing calculator, right? There's a lot we can do with software and simulations that are still quantitative and concrete and convey concepts, but don't require students to say, do all of the math by hand on first contact with the material.
Got it.
And so that's one of the key concepts we're trying to explore to see if we can use that to both allow time and space for students to pivot in. Like if you don't need to come with a specific algebra trig or calc background into the freshman year class to get rolling, it also can help students who don't necessarily have an engineer or a scientist in their personal network to explain to them how the game is played and what careers might be available. Right? You can show them to very quickly why this is an interesting topic, and then of course we do want to train science engineers, so you can't just ignore the formalism and the math, but backload that so that when students engage with it, they've had time to maybe catch up with COREX, but more equally important, understand why they're learning linear algebra and how that will help. The more detailed formalism will allow them to attack general problems in quantum information, not just sort of the sandbox problems that they start off with. So that's sort of the philosophy we're approaching. We're engaging with at the undergrad level, and I would imagine that similar ideas are percolating at the K-12 level. But I think it's a big question about that entire process and how to manage that interface.
Then I'll move into I want to kind of segue into another subject area that we touched upon already, and Zeke, you already helped us segue there. There was a recent science article published in April on diversity in science entitled "Concrete Steps to Diversify the Scientific Workforce." I mean, there's many articles out there that encourage us to do that. We all know that it's important. I know as a government participant in the National Quantum Initiative that the view is that inclusion, or being more inclusive, is a major opportunity for quantum information science and education to grow the workforce. So let me ask this question and ask Karen maybe to start us off and what she thinks. We know that many STEM areas are historically lacking in diversity, including the feeder fields to QISE. Given that QISE is a relatively new field or even a new sort of job prospect for people, what can be done to ensure and attract a diverse and equitable, inclusive workforce for QIS, and what can be done to induce the excitement? So let me give you an example. There's young people right now are really excited about climate change. They're doing studies and they want to be part of sustainability and energy and all those things because they feel personal about it. How can we? Is there something we can do in quantum, and how can we attract this very diverse workforce?
Well, come walk a mile in my shoes. If you were to take any school that you went to or a school nearby or one that you know of, I'm talking K-12 school, and you were to walk into that classroom, you would see diversity. And Absolutely. When I see that every day, and then I'm also at the university now, so when I go to the university, it's a different picture. And my question is, why is there this gap? Which is the same question everyone's been asking all along. You know, do we need to pay for the undergrads? Do we need to pay off their loans or whatever? I think it's deeper than that. And I think it goes back to your K-12 institutions. So just a quick example, since most of you are probably numbers people. If you, whatever school you're thinking of, if you thought of a math teacher, a computer science teacher, a physics teacher, chemistry teacher, and a business teacher, let's say 5 teachers in that school, and you worked with them, and I know there are groups that are already doing that, but you work with them to show them how QISE is important, how it's important to the kids, and some cool things that they could do with it. And they took that back to their classroom. On average, every teacher has about 150 kids. So wow. You take 5 teachers, you teach them, you work with them, you support them, and you now have impacted 750 kids in one school. That's just with 5 teachers. So one of the things in that article that kind of brought this to my attention was it was talking about one of the ways to provide more equity is to pay off, say, $50,000 loans every year for graduate students. That's fine. I know we need research. I know we need that. But that's for one person. You take one teacher, you give them a fraction of that, and every year they are now teaching the quantum concepts. Every year. So every year you're multiplying that, do the math. It adds up really, really quick. So quite a while ago we had a big project where we took and we were trying to get physics into the rural communities. I'm sorry, I used my Texas drawl there.
We got it.
Okay, because a lot of times they don't have physics teachers in those communities.
Right.
And the numbers of the kids that you impact and the teachers that you impact is just astronomical. So if you really want, in my opinion, to get a diverse workforce out there, if you want to increase that pipeline, you need to look back because you have so many opportunities there. And it's not that they won't do it, they just don't know what to do. Yeah. So that's how we're trying to solve it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I really think this is going to be really important. Ofelia, K through 12. I mean, you're seeing the same sort of issue to address. What are you guys doing there at UC Santa Barbara?
Yeah, so we focus on family engagement. I think for us, engaging the whole family is really important. So all our activities are typically led by like a graduate student or an undergrad that work together to develop these activities so that they're accessible with a teacher in our local community, so that it's accessible to parents who don't have a STEM education and younger siblings. And so
how do you get them, Ofelia, how do you get them interested in quantum though? I mean, I could see it talking to people and getting them excited about, oh, the climate's changing and, you know, their kids are going to work on solving that problem.
So,
I mean, how do you get them?
I think it's important to connect them to people that are kind of near peers. So undergrads and graduate students who are excited about quantum and who have that enthusiasm and can talk about like what technology is going to be impacted. Like how is that going to affect their everyday life? I think students need to connect to what's going to affect their everyday life, like they do with climate change and like medical technology. They can think about that as something that they can relate to. And having those conversations with their parents is part of this activity. It's a science activity, but there's also a conversation about careers. Mm-hmm. And they talk a little bit about educational pathways. And so while it's only an hour activity, they have the opportunity to have this conversation with their family. And that is impactful.
Wonderful. Does anybody want to weigh in on other ideas about how to make this more exciting?
Yeah. So
Thomas?
This is Thomas. So the one of the things that was surprising to me when I was actually writing a proposal about material science and engineering, which is similar in the sense that you are bringing multidisciplines together that historically have bad numbers, and I can speak for physics. The numbers are horrible with respect to diversity in these disciplines. And what was surprising to me as a Black man that was 38, that has been along this path the entire time, was that if you look at the numbers of students that are interested, regardless of any type of demographic, just in science in general, that number is actually extremely large. And then the number specifically that I was talking about were students that wanted to major in physics at an HBCU, the one that I was currently teaching at, and it was in the numbers of 100, which is insane. Insane in the sense that if we had space and opportunity and capability to take that 100 and have natural attrition rates from the 100, then we would probably end up something like 20 or 30. 20 or 30, you're already moving into a different realm for physics BS degrees in the first place. So then it begs the question of, if we have 100 people that are interested at the beginning, why don't we have 30 or 50 at the end? And I think that problem in physics is in math, is in chemistry, is in EE, is in all these other places. To be honest with you, the issue that I identified for that particular space was that the students don't even come in day one. They apply, they get accepted, and for whatever reason, when school starts, they don't register. So you can think, and I would encourage people, like we have done in the AIP Team Up workshop implementation, is to meet with the admissions folks and meet with high school counselors and go outside of whatever the process is of students just show up in your class day one and really try to find out, because there are nuances of institution type, demographics, places where you are. But I argue that, and I challenge people with purse strings to call my bluff on this, that if we do make that investment at that particular space, that I think that you will see drastic numbers. Now, of course, in physics, an additional 10 people is a drastic number. But I think that if you really delve into it, then you can at least attack that issue, but there are other ones that exist that we can work on together.
Well, yes, it's a complicated issue, and I think it goes back to what Zeke was saying before about equity. Not everybody has different circumstances, and if we're going to try to help pull more people in, it's so complicated. So, Ofelia, do you want to comment on that, please?
Yeah, at our institution, we have something called Summer Melt, where students, in particular, like low-income first-generation students, there's some obstacles that they have to get through to finish registering so that they can go to school. There's a $100 deposit maybe, or there's additional paperwork they need to fill out or transcripts. And sometimes those things alone have an impact in them enrolling at the institution. So there's actually other barriers before they get there that have nothing to do with their interest in science at all, that has something to do with the personal barriers that are there for them.
Thank you. Well, this is a challenge for all fields in science and engineering, not just for QISE. So it's something that we all think about and is part of all the things that we're investing in at NSF. So I hear the same challenges in other fields. So let me take a slightly different segue. We've been talking about some of the programs that you're all involved in, one of the questions that came up was, in the past few years, we've had seen a significant expansion of the number of QIS type education and training programs. What do you think is the balance between, do we already have enough really good ones that we need just to expand and scale up and connect? Or do we need to create even more new ones, and why? And maybe we can start, Ofelia, do you want to start with that? Or?
Sure. I think, at the beginning of any new initiative, there's always like a flurry of ideas, and that's really important for collecting information and understanding what happens, and it helps us refine our goals. And it also helps us develop new knowledge and know-how about how to do things that help each location or each context that has this funding to develop infrastructure that's going to be really important for them to add on. But I think what we have to look at is what institution have received the resources thus far, and do we know what the population of students enrolled at the institutions look like, and are we, by moving on to scaling things now, are we leaving behind populations of students that are at schools where they don't have the bandwidth, the expertise, or the resources to engage without significant investment and funding. And so that's one thing that I would think about that I think is really important.
So I'm going to, Diana, does QT work sort of address that problem or think about that problem?
So I think one of the major things is, I agree with Ofelia that at the beginning there's a lot of, in any paradigm shift, you have a lot of experimentation at the beginning. And then you have evaluation, and we're not there yet, right? We haven't seen a lot of evaluation of these educational initiatives. So we don't know which ones are good and which ones can be replicated. And so one thing Q2 Work is really trying to do is identify what are the ones that have been tested and evaluated, and can we gather those so that others can do them? Because we don't want everyone reinventing the wheel for the next 10 years on how to do these educational initiatives. But we do need to make sure we know which ones work so that we know which ones to replicate.
Thank you, Diana. Zeke, please.
Yeah, first, just to plus one Diana's comments, I think that's absolutely true. And yeah, so we need to get programs out, because the only way we can do the research is to start teaching it and see what works and what doesn't. But we absolutely need to keep an eye on, not lose sight of the fact that these initial programs are provisional until proven effective. The other thing I wanted to just echo was Ophelia's comment about the dangers of scaling based on narrow test beds. And so I think that's the history of how this works. Is this works great for the dedicated majors in my R1 university. It must work for everyone. So this is something we're working very hard to address within QSTEAM, and Thomas was actually instrumental in helping us with this, wearing his previous hat. Still very involved, but not officially the head of the IBM Quantum Center. But what we're doing, and we'll see how well this works, but we're sort of taking a bit of a sledgehammer to the problem of curriculum development. So I think most people probably on the call in the panel and in the audience have taught a class and set it up for themselves and sort of have the feel for the scale of work that's required there. We're making a real effort to have class development teams on the order of 10 people. So that's a lot of warm bodies, which is creating some exciting logistical challenges. But what it does for us is we get disciplinary diversity from computer science and physics and chemistry. We also get to have dedicated education researchers as part of the development team. And one thing we're really focused on is faculty from community colleges, minority serving institutions, and R1s in the initial build out. So I still stand behind my first statement. I fully expect our initial build out will be very bad, but judged by the eventual, the target, right? But we have to start somewhere, and the hope is that by building that in from the ground up, that we are sort of giving ourselves a more flexible framework and hopefully more appropriate targets to optimize on as we go through the cycle of delivery and assessment and optimization.
So I might add to that, if I might, right quick.
Sure, Karen.
I told you I was not a quantum physicist, so I did not specifically write all the work, the labs that we are doing. But we did build off of what our northern neighbors had done, Perimeter Institute and some of those, because they literally had a national effort to spread some of those materials. So we took some of that. So just a little aha that we have received was, even after a small group, there were about 60 teachers this summer that we worked with for about 4 days, and I honestly did not expect most of them to say, oh yeah, I got this, we can do this. We actually had over 75% of them say, I can do this. I can at least do part of this in my classroom. And so I'm going to count that as a win. We're going to continue to take their feedback and revise, just like you do with any curriculum, but you do have to start somewhere. And sometimes the hard part is finding where you start. It's like pinning the tail on the donkey, where exactly do you put it to start? Because there's so many places you could start.
Well, Karen, that's great. I'm going to go along this line just for another minute or two, and then segue into a different subject, because we only have about 14 minutes left, and we've already covered a lot of areas. So, Karen, I did want to go back to you, because I want to ask you the question, and of course, you're a teacher, or you were a teacher. Are we doing enough to help the teachers? Because, obviously the disaster in math and sciences from the PISA testing, which puts U.S. near the end of all OECD countries, is the indicator we're not doing enough. Can you make a comment on that? Do you think that the things you're thinking about, is it we need to be doing something different?
Are we doing enough? No.
Okay, enough? That's a good answer.
There we go. I think we have lost, we as a country perhaps, if we go back to the space race, which is before a lot of your time, not before mine, there was a large focus on preparing the educators to be able to prepare the students. And since then, there's been kind of a shift of, well, the teachers need to just figure it out. They need to just do it. I got news for you. That's not going to happen when it comes to quantum. They can't just figure it out. They don't know where to begin either, just like I did not know. So we're going to have to give them some type of support. I would like to say we could do that on a big scale, but I guess I would encourage you as a business or just someone with some extra money, invest in a teacher and show them and help them, and the rewards would be tremendous. But right now, the focus seems to be more on the undergrad and the grad and the research in the big centers, and I get that. But I'll keep beating the drum that we need that pipeline to go all the way down. So no, we're not doing enough for teachers. Don't give me the excuse of, well, they have all summer off, they can figure it out, because they're not going to do that.
Yeah, right.
If you were in an engineering firm and there was something new coming out and the firm wanted you to develop that, they would pay you to be trained, they would pay you for the knowledge, they would pay for all that. So it's really not fair to treat your teachers that way. So I know from my own experience, even with begging teachers to at least try it, you like it, the old Mikey commercial, they hear quantum and they get really scared. So we've got to help them.
Yeah, and if I can just say one.
Sure, please.
It's not always just money. It's also access, opportunity, and time. And you don't have to do a lot. And there's a lot of powerful people on the call and in the room. So for instance, through another NSF program, there originally was an RET that was supposed to happen during the summer, but...
You want to define RET?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Research experiences for teachers, where a high school teacher was developing curriculum around the material science that we were working on. But we kind of came to the conclusion that his high school was a block or two away. So during his time off or lunch or whatever, he would just come to the university that I was at, and he was essentially a member of our group. And that was a long-standing relationship for many, many years, and we ended up actually having high school students that were his students in his class come do research there and all of that. Now, mind you, the impact is small, right? We're only impacting 5 or 10 people.
It's a mentorship that's important, and supporting them when they have those questions, and they
teachers in general have this mantle that they're supposed to know it all before they teach their students. And they have to kind of get over that and say, I don't have a clue, teach me, and they're more than willing to do that. But it's support, and like you supporting that teacher and supporting their kids, it will have a ripple effect, but you have to be willing to support them.
Yeah, and just one more note, like you could think of the QIS Center that I'm lucky enough to be involved in, there's 45 PIs there. If those 45 PIs each picked a local high school teacher, then again, we're starting to spread those things. Then can we expand that to a community college and or an HBCU or MSI? And I promise that this is what happened in my own career. And it definitely, there's ways of finding mutually beneficial things for all parties if the right people are in the right Zoom room, is what I'll say.
Right. So I think we're all going to agree in this panel that K through 12 is so important, not just for QISE, but for the country in general, to make sure that we educate our students appropriately so they can enter many fields and have the opportunities. We only have a few more minutes left. I want to segue into some questions about current students and opportunities in QIS because they're confused too. And then give each of you an opportunity to have a closing statement. So I'm going to skip around a little bit based on some of the questions we prepared, but what I think this is an important one for the audience, for you, the students that might be in the audience, and anybody can answer this. What advice would you give current students in terms of skills to acquire before graduating? And this could be, I think, probably undergraduate and graduate, and I guess it could be high school too, so choose what you want, so that they are highly rated candidates to employers. So you know something about the jobs out there that are going to become available or are available, but we know there's lots of computer science jobs and some in physics and engineering. Would anybody like to tackle that? What advice would you give students of skills that maybe isn't obvious that they might need?
So I think that's a hard question because there are so many different jobs in QIS, and so it really depends on what type of job you want, right? It's unfair to expect a single person to have the full stack of expertise, all the way from theoretical algorithms to device physics. And so depending on what your core area is, then there are some additional skills you can get that are quantum related. Like if you were a computer scientist, I would say, okay, well, make sure you're taking linear algebra classes, even if they're not required. And if there's a quantum class, take it. But if not, there are online classes that you can take, MOOCs, right? And I think the answer is different for engineering, right? EE people can get into quantum because we need a lot of controls and we need a lot of lasers, materials. So there's so many areas, and it really is an area-specific question as to what additional skills you would need for quantum.
Which means we need a whole day panel just to discuss that question. So, we only have about 7 minutes left, and I want to give each of you a minute, and then we can see if the audience has a burning question. If you wanted to leave one idea behind that you want everybody in the audience to remember from this panel in a sentence or two, I'm giving you a chance to make your case. So I'm going to start backwards this time. So I'm going to start with Diana. Diana, what would you like to say to the audience, and what do you want them to remember from this panel?
I think I'd like people to remember that to break QIS up into its components and figure out what's intuitive, because I hear so often the sort of linear algebra forward approach to QIS. And there are so many pieces of intuition that you can, sure, it's not being applied to quantum physics, but there are analogies in everyday life for so many of these concepts. And so if we can convey those and get kids interested and aware that, oh, this isn't some crazy thing that I could never do, this aura around quantum is horrible for diversity and workforce development. And so we need to sort of put our egos aside and think about connecting what we do to others instead of separating ourselves as these gurus who do this amazing thing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Diana. James, your turn.
Yeah.
Oh, did it again. Thomas, sorry.
No problem at all.
For some reason, you...
It's okay. No problem at all. Just briefly, so I've been, this week was a good week for those from my hometown and home city of Georgia. We won the World Series, go Braves. And it's been 21 years, so I've been thinking a lot about like 12-year-old Thomas, right? And I really think that a lot of the conversations that have to do with education, workforce development, diversity, and even today, Dr. Dabber's proposal showing the NQI and now there are companies with billion-dollar valuations. The 10-year-old, the 12-year-old, those are the people that will actually see this come to fruition. Like, hopefully I'll still be around, but who knows? But really and truthfully, like when you're thinking, even if you're not solely focused on K through 12 education, you really have to think about what that looks like. Even if you're only working on that research, that will have a 10 to 20 year timeline. So it'd be nice to bring in the 10, 12-year-old and show them what they'll be working on, is what I'll say.
Awesome, Thomas. Karen.
I won't go the K-12 route again. I'll just say, regardless of what you do in quantum, find a way to get involved. Plug in somewhere. There's plenty of opportunities. And just make yourself available. You don't have to know it all to help somebody.
Thank you, Karen. Ofelia.
I think strong mentorship is important and feeling part of the community for the students that we work with. When they feel part of the community, they really start to think of themselves as scientists and that they can do it. And so making sure you're making your community accessible to others and you're providing the right mentorship is really important.
Thank you, Ofelia. Zeke, you get the last word before we see if the audience has a question.
There have been some pretty good comments so far, so I'll try and find a little window. I guess I would come back to one of my earlier statements about the worldview that sort of equitable education is effective education, and to really emphasize that. And I'm sure many people have had this experience. A lot of university, college instructors don't have formal education training. We're kind of dropped in, and it's with 1,000 responsibilities. And the easiest thing in the world is to just perpetuate the model you were trained under. And that I think there's a real opportunity here to do things better. And I think there's a lot of education research pointing the way to how to do that. And so I'd really encourage everybody to pay attention to that and do what they can to incorporate that into their practices.
Maybe stir the pot a bit, break out of the mold. Yeah. So before I thank the panel, I'm going to ask Anna, do we have any questions from the audience that we could entertain?
Actually, I may take advantage of having the microphone to ask a question.
Sure, please.
So we heard this morning from Paul DeBar, the big excitement about hundreds of millions going to industry, and in particular, the challenge we face as a QIS field of having to bring results in a time frame which is really short, 3 to 5 years, or otherwise a lot of the excitement may go away. So we, for example, partner with Rigetti, and things that we hear from our industry partners are we don't necessarily need a lot of PhD graduates, but we need those technicians, we need those engineers that come knowing, having that hands-on knowledge on how to measure a qubit, how to fabricate a qubit, without necessarily having to have the background and knowledge on how to design it or develop a new type of qubit. Are we doing enough as a field to tackle this challenge? We, as Center, Fermilab, we, for example, are trying to establish, for example, some dilution refrigerators dedicated just to that, to, for example, bring some people from adjacent fields, even at Fermilab, some tech, some engineers, and just quickly kind of give them a crash course, but hands-on courses. So are we doing enough, and what can we do to accelerate that?
I think we're not doing enough at the moment. And I think the challenge, I think it is a big challenge to identify what are the skills that people do have and what is that extra set. And I think that creating a custom, say 2-week training or 2-day training, whatever it is, to go from their non-QAS skills that are very transferable and just give that hands-on experience fabricating the qubit or whatever it is, right? Identifying that delta. That's going to be the most efficient way to get a set of people quickly.
Anybody else want to comment? Zeke, please.
Yeah, I'd also like to follow up that I think among the the many structures that I'd like to tear down and rebuild better is engagement between education and employers or industry. Because I think Diana's point is excellent. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and that has a lot of overlap with what you need to know to teach a more sort of traditional university class as well. But so a lot of the knowledge is there, but universities are not that well set up for 1-week training classes, 2-week training classes, the kind of things that industry does well in sort of training and retraining their workforce. So I think there's a opportunity to work together to come up with a model that addresses this need.
So unfortunately, we've run out of time. This is just, first of all, I want to thank, what outstanding panelists. You guys are just amazing. Such a breadth of knowledge, so inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today. And I especially thank Thomas for forgiving me for screwing up his name twice. But you guys did an outstanding job. And I want to thank the audience for listening.
Linda. Sorry to interrupt you. I think we have one question. If you allow.
I'm sorry. I was trying to stay on time, but if
I know there is a lot of excitement, maybe we can allow one question.
Sure, please, Anna.
Thank you for the time. There was reference to the aura around quantum computing, and I guess I've bought into that. In that quantum computing, it's not something unlike the other STEM fields. Almost nobody encounters it in their daily life, and it really does just fall out of the math, or at least that's how I learned it. So I guess, is there an emerging best practice into how to, especially in K-12, how to have students grasp it at all? Thank you.
Great question. We kind of touched upon asking how we get people excited about it. Who would like to try to answer? Diana, maybe? Or
yeah, I can answer
Karen?
that. So if you go on, we have a website, epic.cs.uchicago.edu/resources, and EPIC is EPIQC. And we have a set of zines. And and zines are these, you can take an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and fold it up and make one cut, and you've got a little booklet. And so for each of these concepts, we've identified everyday analogies. And so, it's not the same as it is in quantum physics, but by connecting to what people already know, and we've made learning trajectories, that the beginning of the learning trajectory is all examples from daily life, and then it gets a little bit more technical, maybe just examples from algebra or arithmetic, and then it gets to the quantum tie-in. And so you're starting them out with something that's familiar, and so you don't build up the aura, because you're just showing them that it's just baby steps from what you experience every day. So that's how we're going about it.
And I'll just briefly say, that
sure.
It's very important, at least in my own community of Black physicists, for us to go and reach and talk about what we do and become role models for young students. And then at the same time, to develop ways that are culturally relevant to build quantum intuition. Because it's very different. So I teach a lot of physics at some point, and I would always find myself in at least the early classes talking about being in a car for whatever reason, maybe because I just drove there, or assuming that everyone has been in a car in their lifetime. There's no such thing as a quantum car right now, but hopefully through quantum game stuff that Diane's working on, myself, other people, the Quantum Atlas is another good thing that's out there by Emily Edwards. There are some materials, but I think it's really engaging the community and engaging young people early to start to build this idea of what the physics of quantum looks like, because they don't experience it right now in their own classical world.
Interesting.
So you have
Anna, I can't see you.
Them where they are.
Yeah. Well, just think of entanglement as something that people think is just crazy, right? But gravity is crazy. right? Why do we move towards large objects when we're not even touching them, right? Magnetism is crazy. There are physics concepts that don't make sense, but we learn how to harness them. And then we first learn what they do and sort of light harnessing of them. And then we figure out how to mathematically predict exactly what they're going to do. And so then we can be much more precise about harnessing them. And so I think making analogies like that and no longer saying it's so crazy. No, it's just like these other things that you're just more used to in everyday life.
Well, Diana, I think we're really lucky to have someone like you tackling this problem, because those were great examples. I'm sold. Anna, do we have any more questions?
Yes, there is one more.
It's up to you. It's up to you.
We'll take the last one and then the coffee break.
So I don't know how to actually phrase this as a question, but more as a comment. I'm a freshman undergraduate, so I guess likely the most recent in age to actually experiencing K through 12. One of your later questions in the discussion was like, what would you encourage students? And I would hope for a comment on this. I would personally encourage students, whether it's in quantum information science or any field, to find local companies, organizations, or anything to get involved with and find them to do whatever it is that you could be curious in. And it doesn't even have to be something that you're deeply interested in, just something to get that experience and be involved with that to then later use that and have a better understanding of what that field actually is. And then alongside that, for universities, more frequently, to pair up and team with local high schools and offer like education and programs and I guess like dual enrollment. I think that would be very helpful. And my first point was it's more of like addressing the short term, because we're currently working on long-term projects to help the students, but right now that's not really going to help the students that are right now in high school. So I don't know if like what you think of that, of students going into the industry right now, or I don't know what you have to say about that.
Yeah. I think any way you can get them engaged is a win. There are a lot of really cool things in quantum that you can show students in high school, whether it's in computer science or math or physics or chemistry or whatever. And I think we need to know enough of those so that we can capitalize on it. So I remember when I was in the high school, there was a kid who really wanted to know how the telephone worked. I know they're now cell phones, but that was back in the old days. And I set him up with an internship, at AT&T. And he ended up doing that the rest of his life. So it absolutely, there are kids that have that specific interest, but you have to let them even know it's out there. They don't even know why their GPS does what it does. They don't know. And when you tell them, they're like, whoa, really? Well, that's cool. What if I did this or that or whatever? So absolutely, the more ways you can get them engaged and the more ways you can help teachers see those connections, the better off we're all going to be. And to me, that's the long-term solution. So we've got to be able to focus on that.
So please join me in thanking again this distinguished panel and Dr. Linda Sapochak. Thank you.